Hello, everyone. My name is Mackenzie Howard, and I am a therapist, and I'm also the multimedia manager here at KKJ. We are so excited to be starting this kind of element of our work and our social media. We're really excited to have some videos out on our platforms where we can give people an opportunity to learn more about us and the work that we do here and what we're passionate about. So today I have with us our fabulous intern. His name is Nguyen, and he is here to talk about himself, but he will also be sharing some information about a really awesome presentation that he put together. Thank you for being here, Luke.
Of course, I'm very happy to be here.
Awesome. So I just have a couple questions for you. The first, could you please just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Luke, and I go to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I'm currently a senior right now, and I'm majoring in psychology with a minor in neuroscience. And because of that major, I work a lot in mental health, and I aspire to work as a clinician psychologist one day. Which led me to seek out this internship and eventually build the presentation that I did for this practice.
Awesome. So tell me, what initially interested you in the mental health field?
Yeah, I think the interest is just how little weight is put on it, especially given the drastic consequences that can come from various mental health disorders. And the fact that a lot of people to this day still don't believe in its existence and question its validity. And I see that a lot going through high school and college, that mental illness affects nearly everybody you would meet in your entire life in some way or another, some worse than others, and there's always a spectrum. But there's always an effect, and it's always there, and people just don't talk about it as much as they should. And I have always striven to prioritize mental health over various things like grades, and if certain friends are treating you a certain way, your mental health is more important than that, and relationships and stuff like that. And the priority of mental health is so important because you have to live with your own mental health, and you have to live with your own mentality of yourself. And if that idea of yourself is bad or is polluted by negative external means, and it harms your personal values and the way you see yourself, you're not going to have a good life experience. And you can't take a pill to get rid of that. You can't really let that heal with a cast. It's something that's so hard to manage and treat because it's not tangible.
Yeah.
And there's not going to be one right way. It's not like breaking a bone. We're like, oh, the bone heals itself and resets. No, you have to handle it specifically with your social values, your family values, your upbringings, and how your life, it's all catered to your life, and it's not just one way something heals. And that's where the difficulty comes in people believing it, is because it's so subjective. And that subjectivity leads to stigma, and that stigma is why I want to get into psychology and why I want to do counseling, is to allow people, specifically young people, the chance to understand that it's okay to feel emotions and it's okay to have mental illness issues.
Right.
And getting treatment for it doesn't make you crazy. It doesn't make you this bad, evil thing. It's just a normal thing to feel and a normal thing to get treatment for.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I really love that you mentioned how far the reach is of mental health issues, right? Because even if you don't personally deal with a mental health disorder or a mental health issue, you probably love somebody who does. And so learning what it looks like to support a person who's dealing with mental health issues is really, really important too. So I like that you mentioned that, just because you're not experiencing it personally doesn't mean that it's not impacting you.
Right. Personal experience, your own personal experience doesn't invalidate another person's experience.
Yeah, beautifully said. Awesome. Can you talk a little bit, we're going to get into more about the presentation and the topic that you picked and all of that, but recognizing that you're an Asian American man, how do you see your culture playing into, or how does culture play a role in mental health services or accessing mental health services?
Yeah, this is something that I always think about when I look at the statistics. Is I belong to not only the Asian culture but also American male culture, and let's start with there. American male culture is heavily dominated by the idea of stoicism and not showing emotion. From the 60s with like Rambo and stuff to like now, like showing emotion is not something that is celebrated in the male community, and I'm glad to see that being changed a little bit, but there's still a lot of heavy stigma with men opening up about their own mental health because they're stereotypically expected to be the strong providers and the handling and taking care of the family, so you have to not have these issues, be less emotional. And having that stigma put on you as an American male really harms development, because not only do you not feel safe sharing these emotions, the expectation is that if you have these emotions, you are in some way less of a man, and that really messes with one's perception of their own self-image, right? And that leads to worsening mental health outcomes, and then as those mental health outcomes worsens, you still don't have an outlet because of that stereotype. So that's the first part of my culture that really impacts how why I want to destigmatize mental health, especially among communities that don't seem to value it as much, and that takes me into the I guess my own Asian heritage and community. Where I come from, Vietnam, mental health, especially in the older generation, is seen as something to just get over, to handle yourself, and there's not a lot of emphasis in that generation put on mental health and mental illness, because again, that generation had to work a lot harder than us, at least physically, to provide the best experience for my generation, and I'm internally grateful to my parents, but with that hard struggle comes with the consequence of they don't really understand it when I say, I'm sad out of the blue, because like, why are you sad? No one's hurting you. You have food on your plate. You have a house. You have Netflix. Why could you be sad? Well, they literally cannot comprehend that. But that's a result of the culture and the hardship of their own upbringing. That like they didn't have room to feel, let their depression be validated, because if they get depressed, they can't work. If they can't work, they don't have a future, right? So I'm in a generation now where I too have to work, not as hard as they did, but I too have to work, and I am now able to comprehend my own mental health, my own mental state, and recognize when things aren't doing well. But when I recognize these things, I can't really seem to communicate that to my parents who belong to the old generation, where that just doesn't make sense to them. Yeah. So that's stigma. I would call it generational stigma. I don't know if there's a real word for it.
There is now.
Yeah,
I like that.
It's a stigma that generation doesn't understand, and it's something that causes a lot of discourse between my generation and my parents' generation. It's that like these kids are feeling too many emotions. They're feeling too lazy. They don't get things done. When in a hard point of view, we have a lot of mental health, I guess, baggage going on that's keeping us from being productive. It's not really a choice. It's more of a metaphorical mental like weight on ourselves that keeps us from moving. But that communication is so hard, especially with the language barrier, because I grew up speaking mostly English and my parents speak mostly Vietnamese, so translating and communicating words like anxiety or depression is not as easy as it was, if it were English to English. Right? So there's that language barrier as well. And I again, that's why I try really hard to teach and destigmatize about mental illness, because it is something that everybody faces. Because my parents, they face depression. They just don't have they can't conceptualize it.
Yeah.
And they just go, well, I got over it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but that's something that the world will have to continue to push forward with, and I hope to see a change and more bridging of that multiple generation communication soon.
Yeah, I hear a lot about what you were saying around other older generations' perception of millennials and Gen Z and all of that stuff as being lazy or overly sensitive or not motivated. And the conversation that I frequently find myself in with people in my own life, but also in professional spaces, is that there isn't necessarily an increase. It's not like all of these mental health disorders just popped out of nowhere. It's that now, as a society, we have the education and the vocabulary and the self-awareness to name what it is, as opposed to shoving it down and saying, it's fine, I just have to get to work, or I'm just in a mood, or I'm just whatever. We now have space to talk about those things, and now people are able to share, hey, I think that this thing that I'm experiencing is not normal and it makes me feel XYZ, and I would like a space where I can talk about that. So yeah, I find that very interesting what you said. That was really cool how you presented it as two different parts of who you are, because they are, right? Yeah. Okay, so just to kind of shift gears a little bit, can you talk a little bit about what the topic of your presentation is? I think you've kind of alluded to it, but what is the topic and why did you pick it?
Yeah. The topic primarily is mental illness and therapy. Two things that I think everybody knows exists, but don't really get. And I think the problem with that mostly comes from representations through media, because people who don't have experiences with mental health or mental illness or therapy in general get most of their images of those concepts through television, movies, magazines, news stories. And the problem with that is the media sacrifices accuracy for entertainment a lot of the times. The biggest example I can think of going back to 2017 would be 13 Reasons Why. When that show came out, it raised a lot of discussion about mental health and suicide and how it's affecting our generation. But at the same time, it created a story that over dramatizes mental health and creates a negative image of it, and creates a negative image of people who go through these experiences. And there are a lot of consequences that came from that as well, including the rise of I saw some statistic. There was an increased rate of teen deaths by suicide in the same month where that show was first released. And that got a lot of people talking about whether or not people should show these concepts in especially teenage media, where as you know, teenagers and adolescents are super influenced by media. So that's one example I can think of. And in general, all of these representations build to stigma in some way, because even the best, most accurate depictions only show a snapshot of someone's mental illness. And you don't really know the full story, because as I said before, someone's specific mental health issue stems from their social environment, family upbringing, cultural values, the people they keep around, just so many variables that watching a movie where someone is motivated by one specific trauma, it doesn't really capture everything else going on in their lives. And there's also different mental illnesses that are less easy to comprehend. Something like schizophrenia. Schizophrenia, were very popularly shown as the voices in my head are telling me to do something, but they don't talk about the flat affect, or like the the word salad that comes up, or like the different, like the negative symptoms and the positive symptoms. They only see the positive symptoms or the hallucinations, and OCD is always seen as being super clean and neat, but they don't talk about the compulsions and the obsessions that comes with it. So that's where mental illness, people don't really get. Is there's a lot more to mental illness than what you see on TV, and to understand a person going through mental illness is to understand everything about them, and everybody's experience is different, and you can never really understand them.
Yeah.
And then to go with therapy, well, there's a lot of representations of therapy that are negative. There's a lot of representations of therapy where the therapist is unhelpful. They experiment with their patients. They engage in relationship with their patients, which is highly unethical. And then as I go through my psychology courses and I rewatch these things, I watch this again, I'm like, wow, no wonder people don't want to go to therapy.
Yeah.
It looks horrible. But that's where I really started. Is like, I want to teach, especially young people my age and younger, what it really looks like and why it's okay to talk about your mental health and maybe potential mental illnesses you're going through, and seek help, whether that be therapy or talking to somebody. Just seek help in some way if you are experiencing something, because and I use this example in my presentation, but like, if you break your ankle and you just leave it and ignore it and continue to walk on it, it's gonna hurt. It probably lead to permanent damage. But if you break your ankle, you tell somebody, they go to the hospital and maybe put it on ice, cast, it'll heal. And that's something that is very similar to emotional pain. If you feel emotional pain, maybe negative self-thoughts, thoughts of anxiety and things like that, letting it fester, it will worsen it, and it will worsen everything around you and lead to dramatically horrible consequences. So that's the two areas that I bounce around with my presentation, is teaching proper, accurate information about what mental illness is, looks like, where it comes from, and what therapy is, what it looks like to be in a therapy session, what types of therapies you get conducted, and potential outcomes of therapies. And I provide, at the very end, I provide resources for students and young people who want to get help.
That's awesome. You've talked a little bit about how it's really important to you. The demographic that you're focusing on is really important to you, and that it's young people who are maybe in their adolescence, early 20s, mid 20s. What is it about that specific demographic that speaks to you in relation to this topic?
Yeah, I think the statistic was like ages 10 to 34. Suicide is either the second or third leading cause of death in that age group. And I consider suicide a preventable cause of death. And I think prevention starts at treatment, and it starts early. And if someone is 10 years old and they have the idea of not wanting to exist in this world, that's a red flag. And that just to me is so incredibly sad and so incredibly painful to think about. And that's why I think as soon as they have a concept of themselves, and as soon as they get into school, they need to understand what mental health is and how to take care of their own mental health. Because school's not a fun place to be in, especially when you don't have the best, social standing, or you don't have the best, you have demographic setbacks because of your various identities, and bullying is something that people have tried to control, but it's still rampant in schools. And kids are mean. They can be so mean. And all those factors contribute to poor mental health outcomes and ultimately increased deaths by suicide in that age group. And that doesn't stop as you go through high school and even through college, because this is where transition happens. This is where people form their own personal identities. And if you have been grown and your personal identity is this negative image, is this image of worthlessness, or this image of of not being enough, and that's how you encode yourself, then your life and your existence seems meaningless. And I've heard that from anecdotal evidence, and I've seen that in research. Like, there's a lot of things in there's a lot of development in puberty that leads to emotional instability, and because of that, this age group, at least the adolescent to young adult age group, is highly vulnerable to not only just poor mental health issues, but deaths by suicide, because of all those factors I've talked about. They all play a role in leading us a person with so much life left to live to believe that they don't have a reason to live. And that is why I try to encourage as many people my age and younger, as soon as possible, regardless of whether your parents agree with it or not, seek out some form of mental health help or mental health treatment, because you deserve to live a long, happy life, regardless of what you've done, where you've been, who you are. You deserve that help, and a lot of people are grown in an environment where they don't believe they do deserve that help.
Yeah, absolutely. Or there's some sort of shame attached to that of you weren't strong enough to handle it on your own. I have clients who will say that, like it takes a lot to choose to come to therapy because there's so much stigma around it, right? And there's not really any stigma to go to the doctor if you don't feel well, right? You just make an appointment and go. But it takes a lot of courage for people, especially if their family is not supportive or their friends are not supportive of it, to still make the choice to go. And so I try to really applaud people for doing that, because it's a difficult decision. And letting people know life is hard, existing is hard, right? Period. Even if you don't have something like traumatic or super major stressor happening, and you don't have to be at your last wit's end before you seek therapy. You could just seek therapy because it's Tuesday and you just need somebody to talk to. I try very hard also to let my clients know that I also have a therapist. I think a lot of people are surprised to hear that, but like we also need support, right? Like, your
professors probably have a therapist.
Yes, exactly.
Your bosses probably experience things.
Yes. Just because life has stressors, right? And I'm a firm believer. I know you've mentioned this a lot about like the impact that childhood can have on the way that we develop as adults, which is why it's important to have these conversations at a really early age with children. But a lot of the work that therapists do is around unpacking things that happened when they were children and unpacking the messages that they received and all of that. So I think it's awesome that you're gearing this towards that age group. That's really awesome.
It surprises me how little people value their own mental health. And since high school, students come to me to kind of unload, because I listen a lot to people's stories, and ever since high school, people come to me and talk to me about various things, and I was like, why don't you get help? And they go, oh, I don't deserve it, or it's not bad enough, or my parents don't want me to, and that parents thing is something that that's very out of your control. But taking that first step to reach out to even just a friend is a good step. And hopefully, after viewing my presentation, I hope people will find it in themselves to understand that if you're going to get a dental checkup every year, every 6 months, you should probably get a mental health checkup just to see if you're doing well.
Right, absolutely. So I want to talk a little bit about your experience. I'm sorry. No, yes, we kind of talked about that. But your experience as an intern at KKJ. Can you just share a little bit about what you've done here, what you've learned, what you'll be taking away from this experience, all of that?
Starting at KKJ, first of all, Dr. Katrina and Dr. Ludlam are amazing, and they've treated me so well over this past semester, and it reinforced my desire to work at a practice and to be a clinician. And they have given me a very well-structured schedule. They let me work on my own time, and they provide me with a lot of insight on my work and a lot of advice about my future going after college. So their mentorship, spectacular, amazing, would totally recommend to any other intern. As for my work personally, it started with meeting with Dr. Katrina to create a project, and I was like, what is something I want to get out of this internship? Well, let's teach kids it's okay to get therapy. And so with that idea, I pitched it to Dr. Katrina, and she's like, sounds great, what do you need? And so we got everything set up, and I was able to build this presentation, bounce it back and forth with Dr. Katrina over a couple months, and it turned out the way it did. And she provided her insight from her experience, and then Dr. Ludlam provided some information from her research and her statistics as well. And it built into this presentation where anybody can understand and anybody will feel like, you know, they're not lost watching it. On top of that, I also worked with Dr. Ludlam on her specific project where I was tasked with reading hours and hours of evaluations. And that was the part that really gave me insight into clinical interviewing and doing and performing evaluations. It's a lot longer than I expected. It is like hours and hours, and like not 50 to 90 to over 100 pages of evaluation. And what I got from that is that everyone's story is different, and you need to really examine the nuances of what someone's telling you to really make a full decision about something like child custody or a diagnosis, right? Because going through class, I didn't, we were given examples of diagnoses. Johnny has this for a couple months. What does he have? It's very textbook. But reading those evaluations with Dr. Ludlam really put into perspective how much more real and how much more nuance goes into making clinical decisions, like diagnosing someone with substance use disorder. Are they drinking because they're sad, or are they drinking because it's an addiction, right? It's just first of all, it's daunting. I have to admit, it is a little bit daunting, but it is something that I didn't find myself bored doing. I like watching it. I like listening to these people. I guess reading these people's stories and analyzing, what led to that ultimate decision of this person should get custody of the child, or this person should be diagnosed with something, or this person should not be released from wherever, right? Like it's providing very valuable insight. And then going to my practice presentation with the whole practice, everybody was there when I presented to them, and their feedback was so valuable, and they were so welcoming and inviting, and I felt very accepted, and it felt like I was on the right track, and this whole practice made me feel very welcome, and again boosted my motivation to continue to pursue psychology and clinical work.
Yeah, that's amazing. So what's next for you? I know you have another semester.
I have one more semester, and in that semester I'm going to be actually taking classes as normal, but on top of that I'm going to be teaching actually a course.
Amazing.
As a senior, I'll be teaching other undergraduates, and the course is about mental health in TV and movies, where I teach students about mental disorders and how they're depicted on screen, and how those on-screen depictions provide implications to the wider world. Obviously 13 Reasons Why is on there. That's why it's the first thing on my brain. But there's things like Silver Linings Playbook and things like Sesame Street, how they present mental illness, and things like even children's cartoons. I'm thinking about Legend of Korra, something I watched as a kid. There's a lot of great stuff about PTSD in there, and the twist is it's not all bad. Representations of mental health in media is extremely important, and it can be done horribly.
Yes,
but it's not all bad. And I think the younger, if kids learn about mental illness at a younger age, like, hey, being sad for a week, that's a real thing that happens, right? The younger they learn that, the sooner they'll have a concept of it, and maybe the sooner they'll get treatment for it if they see it in themselves, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, are you creating that course?
I have created it already. I made the whole syllabus and I made the thing. So now I just need to find the various TV shows I'm going to talk about and practice over presenting. It's the first time I ever taught anything in front of a full class for a whole semester. I get to grade papers. Like, it's going to be a whole thing.
Yeah.
But I'm excited. But after this semester, I'm going to be applying to various graduate schools. I've already submitted my applications, and hopefully I intend to attend graduate school, get my PhD, and after that, pursue a career in clinical psychology, whether that be a practice, whether that be doing evaluations, or wherever that takes me. But ultimately, ideally, I would love to have my own office with my name on it and have patients come in and out, and I help them on a one-on-one basis as best as I can.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing, and I have no doubt that you will achieve all of those things. I'm excited to hear about how your course goes. Please keep us posted, because that sounds really amazing. And that's a huge opportunity to have, like, to teach your peers and kind of get your feet wet and see what that feels like. That's awesome. Wow, okay. Well, thank you so much for talking to me today. I'm excited to see your presentation. That will be up for everybody to view as well. And yeah, I will put Luke's information. If you have an email or something that I can put if people have questions or would like for you to come and present or something, I'll put his email, or we'll make sure that it's somewhere in this video. And again, thank you so much. We're so excited, to be able to do this type of series and have, more interactions and real conversations with people about why they love mental health and what, where their passion comes from. So thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for watching.